We'll do it again. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to November the 4th. This is a collective committee meeting, and tonight we have something a little different. We're going to have a work study at the very beginning of our meeting, and we have two items before us. The first item is going to be presented about the council salaries and the mayor's salary, and the second one has to do with the TIF. It's going to be a very educational program for everyone. And the way that we're going to work the work session is that we're going to have our speakers come forth, and at the end of both speakers, when the work session is finished, then we will be opening it up to public input. But during the interim, we will be asking colleagues if they have questions. Okay? Very good. The first one, Mr. Zuber, do you want to open it up?
Sure.
It has to do with the mayor and council salary recommendation. When you were the finance chair, you started this, and I think you should continue it through.
Okay. We're going to have a presentation from an ad hoc committee that was appointed by council at my recommendation to review not only the mayor's salary, because council has to take some sort of action in order that he doesn't get a $55,000 a year increase at the beginning of next year, but also to review the salaries for councils. Neither one of these positions, the mayor nor council salaries, have been increased since 2015. And council often, because they're the one that by charter has to set the salary, kicks it down the road. They want to deal, don't want to deal with it. So I brought forth a couple times to put together a citizens committee in order to take a look at these two issues, and the council president wanted them to present this evening. There's two members of the committee, Pat Tatarczyk and Bob Brooks. We just asked them to come up and go over a little bit of what they did as the committee and talk a little bit about their recommendation. We did have a discussion on this in the finance committee before this, also in regards to this particular issue.
Thank you. Pat and Bob, would you come forward, introduce yourselves, and take us through your presentation? Thank you.
Okay. Again, I want to thank you tonight for letting us present.
Your name. Your name.
Bob Brooks, Teasel, or Giant Falls.
And Pat Tatarczyk.
Your address. Street address.
Oh, 312 Brunswick.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to take this time really to thank City Council on behalf of Eric, who couldn't be with us tonight, Pat and myself. Anytime we see where non-elected citizens can participate in government, we all think that's a great thing, as I know you all feel that way. City Council, we are honored to be asked by Council to do this. Our backgrounds include Pat as Human Resources, Eric as benefits, and myself as financial advisor. And I checked our resume, it's about 100 years worth of experience. Yours were only 10, Pat. But anyways, so at this time, I really would like to turn it over to Pat for the actual presentation as to the numbers and how we got there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And most of you probably already received this information, but I'm going to recap it for everybody in the audience also for questions, clarity, and so forth. You did mention that this was brought up because of the charter, and if nothing is done, and that still could be an option, that Mayor Spatzel gets a $55,000 increase. So with that in mind, we did some research to see if that is something viable that you'd like to consider. So we all come from the corporate background, so we approached it from a corporate standpoint. Came with all these brilliant ideas. Can we do this? Come to find out that we can't do many of them. So we got rid of that really quickly, and then just went on head on into researching what we think is a good options for salary. So we looked at the local market. What is Bay paying what are their responsibilities? What is Avon? What is Rocky River, Amherst, you name it. Anybody who had a similar population, we looked at to see what their mayor, full-time mayor, was being paid. And also council. We looked at all that for council. We also then, since I'm in HR, did what a local or a national, it's called SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management, to see what, if that person was doing well in his job since 2016, what would they have gotten as an increase? And 3% was typical, so we indexed that to 2024, and then took it to 2026 to see what that number would be. We also then Lynn contacted SERBS, which is the state basically repository for data for all union, and used their numbers from 2016. What did the unions negotiate from the Cleveland area for increases for their members? We took those numbers two different ways and it came up with the same numbers. We indexed it to 2028 because that's how long the term would be. That ended up being 126,000 if we indexed that number. When you took the SHRM numbers, it was like 130. So with that in mind and trying to be competitive with the local community, we suggested that you have a possible increase of 125,000 to go from 98,000 to 125. Additionally, being in HR, one of the biggest things that people would also ask for when they were negotiating for their jobs, when we were hiring them, was vacation time. So this position has 2 weeks vacation. Somebody in that position should not just have 2 weeks vacation. So we also suggest that they have 3 weeks vacation. Now I know there's a lot of flexibility in that position, but there's something psychological about time off in people's head. Whether they use it or not, most people don't. But there's something psychological about having that number of vacation time. So with that, just to wrap that up, so we suggested 125,000 for the mayor with his current job responsibilities and 3 weeks vacation to go from 2 to 3. Council, we did the same thing. We researched the local markets, hadn't had an increase since forever ago, and suggest that they get go from 12,000 a year to 14,000 a year, and council president has an additional 2,000. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Zuber, or anything else?
No, just that, as I said in the committee, I would look at moving this to first reading for next week and then pass it after 3 readings with the mayor. That's going to be on the emergency clause because it's got to be done by the end of the year. If we don't do it by the end of the year, then, like was stated prior, it's a $55,000 a year increase.
Thank you. Any questions among the council members? On the mayor? Yes, Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank the committee because I know that they worked hard and went through several meetings and researched these issues very well. And I just want to let them know I appreciate what they did. Thank you.
Absolutely. Not only are they taking time out of their regular evenings, right, but they were doing research while on the job and trying to bring that research to the city. And I thank you, and for working with our HR director. So that was the questions on the mayoral part. What about on the council part? Are there any other comments from anyone? Mr. Arnold, did you want to say something?
No, I mean, I've said in the past, I can't vote for any increase in council salary.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else on council? Okay, then we're going to go to the very next topic. The next topic we're going to be sending down to Mr. Arnold has to do with the tax increment financing, which is commonly called a TIF, and bonds for the interim development agreement with Avon Lake Environmental Redevelopment Group, known as ALERG or ALERG. And we have a special guest here, Mr. Arnold. Do you want to introduce?
Actually, I'm going to defer to the mayor for his first comments tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. So just a brief overview. This TIF work session is to further explain what TIFs are and how they work and how it can be facilitated through the power plant property. TIF is a commonly used developmental tool to cover upfront developmental costs, such as infrastructure, environmental remediation, and public amenities. Avon Lake schools are an integral part in this process, and they must agree to the TIF and must be involved in negotiations with the developer. So I want everybody to understand that. The other thing to understand, this is a brownfield site. Even though it's on the lake, it's still a brownfield site, and it's something that will take a creative development to make this happen, and it makes it challenging. Many large projects use TIFs for development. It's a fairly common tool in today's market. You're going to hear more about that as we go through this. And again, we are competing with developers who are looking for land to develop, and we have to entice them to come to Avon Lake and provide this for us. The key to this whole developmental agreement and the TIF process, it enables us to purchase 23 plus acres of land on the lake for park. And this TIF agreement, which is part of the developmental agreement, is part of that. Again, I want to keep in mind that this is just a roadmap. This is not anything final. It's not permanent. It's an interim developmental agreement. This is the TIF portion of that. This is just a roadmap for us to let the public know, let developers know, and everybody know how we're going to go through this process to develop this land. And the number one thing that we got from the community, and I think all of us on council, and certainly I've heard, is the number one ask of the community was for a park. And this enables us to create parkland on the lake without incurring any debt, without using our general fund, without going out, increasing our debt. So this is a great tool that will benefit not only the city, but certainly the community. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Arnold and introduce our guest, but just want to provide a quick overview before we got started. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So tonight, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the environmental concerns of the power plant. Tonight, we're going to have a work session on what is a TIF, how TIFs work, just the ins and outs of them. We've actually got a few presentations tonight. Our first presentation will be from our zoning attorneys from Burns-Ochsner. Jordan Burns and Majid McLoof will be speaking tonight. And then after that, I'm going to introduce Todd Davis to introduce our second speaker.
Thanks very much. Just Jordan Burns.
Just click once to enhance it, and it doesn't go back. Just click once to advance.
Got it, thanks. I'm going to start off before Majid speaks to reiterate one of the things that the mayor just said, because I think that's of critical importance here. You do not have in front of you a TIF ordinance, a proposal to apply tax increment financing to any portion of the power plant property or any property in the city at this point. Instead, what you have in front of you is an interim development agreement, which as one of its components includes essentially, as I'll use the mayor's word, a roadmap for how a TIF might work in conjunction with the redevelopment of the power plant property. It explains in broad terms how that process is anticipated to work and how eventually an ordinance may come before you to vote on adopting a TIF with respect to the power plant property. We are some ways away from that ordinance. Instead, what you have is that outline, that roadmap, and it does a few important things that we'll touch on in our presentation. Number one, it lays out what the developer is going to do after this interim development agreement is approved, if you approve it, in terms of working with the school district to hopefully, from its perspective, reach an understanding with the school district regarding a TIF on the power plant property. And we'll talk more about that, but it lays out that it's the developer's job to approach the school district and negotiate that. It's the administration, the city administration's job to support that effort. It's not city council's job to approve that. City council will have unfettered discretion whether to approve or reject that agreement as part of a TIF ordinance. But it lays out that it's the developer's job to go to the school district and negotiate that. Number two, it lays out that a portion of the TIF funds are to be used for the acquisition of the park property that the mayor referenced that you've heard all about before, and to the improvement of that, so that a portion of the funds that will be generated are earmarked for the acquisition of the park and the improvement of the park property. So when you are eventually presented with an ordinance, this lays out that you will know exactly where a portion of those funds are to go. In terms of the city administration's obligation on that front, the city administration's obligation under the interim development agreement is to support that ordinance before this body, before the city council. Again, the the city council is not obligated under this interim development agreement to approve that ordinance. The administration is obligated to support the efforts to reach an agreement with the schools and to support the ordinance that will eventually come before this body. The developer is obligated to negotiate with the school district, and everybody is obligated that a portion of those funds that would be generated from the TIF are to be used for the acquisition and improvement of the park property. With regard to the TIF, in terms that are a little bit simple, but not too simple, that's it. That's all the development agreement, the interim development agreement provides. So while we're here to explain to you in more detail how a TIF works, what it is, how it works, you're going to hear from another speaker about a sort of a hypothetical of how funds would flow through a TIF. This is all part of, I think, a broader education process, because eventually you will be presented with an ordinance to vote on. And part of your determination is going to depend on how well you understand how this process works. So we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what a TIF is and how it works. But it's not because you're approving one here. That's down the road a bit. So with that as sort of an introduction, I'm going to let my partner Majid McLoof do some talking.
Thank you very much, Madam President and members of Council, Mayor. And I'll go 3 for 3 just to emphasize what this is not, because I think the biggest fear that we always have is when you go through a process like this, or a presenter like me goes in front of the council, people start thinking that things are set in stone. And I think as sick and tired you may be of Todd, Jordan, and me, I hate to tell you, you're going to see us a lot more down the road. We're far from done. This is step 1, which is laying out the vision and a roadmap, but this is not committing the city to issue the TIF or to the size of the TIF or any of those things. It's effectively telling the developer, go ahead, negotiate with the school district, and if you're able to reach some agreement, come back to us and we'll consider it. And when we consider it at that point, we'll consider it under these parameters. And I say this also very importantly because of the next speaker, and I'm sure he will go through that as well, but I want to be very careful that everybody understands what's going to be presented is a hypothetical. We're not even talking about the TIF specifically that is in front of us. You know, the numbers there, nobody's wedded to those numbers. They're numbers. It's, you know, you picked a number and he's trying to draw a hypothetical as to how a TIF would work, but it's not even specific to that development, to just explain how the process works. And with that, I'll go quickly through it. Effectively, a TIF is a development tool that enables municipalities to exempt from real property taxation the new value added to a group of parcels as a result of improvements to those parcels. Effectively, think of it this way. You have a piece of property. You have the base, the value of the property before development. You have development on the property. What you exempt is the incremental increase of valuation as a result of the development. So the base is never touched. There is no exemption to the base. It's unaffected. It continues as is. What you exempt is that's why the word increment is there. It's the incremental increase that results from that development. So if there is no development, the same amount of taxation remains with or without the development remains the same, and we're just talking about the increase that comes as a byproduct of that development. What it does is you exempt that increment, and then you obligate the developer to make payments in lieu of taxation. We call them as pilots. So the city would establish a special fund, and those pilots, the payments in lieu of taxation that generally track the amount of the real property taxation that you exempted, is collected by the county, sent to the city, and is put in that special fund for purposes of the improvements that would be financed by the pilots. What do I'm clicking next?
There you go.
Oh. In this case, the pilots will be used for three purposes primarily. The first purpose is to compensate the Avon Lakes School District for its agreement and exemption from real estate taxations that exceed specified amounts. What happens is Ohio law allows a municipality to do a TIF on its own without the agreement of the school district. But that TIF cannot exceed 10 years and 75% of the taxation that you're exempting. Everybody knows that a development of this size, you're going to need a very different TIF that is for a longer duration. So that will require the approval of the school district. And what will happen here is the developer will have to negotiate with the school district for that TIF, and part of those negotiations, I presume, is the school district will want to make sure that they receive some of those proceeds, and that will be part of the negotiations that the school district would have with the developer, and ultimately that will be incorporated into a TIF ordinance that will come before the council for its, again, I repeat, its consideration. You could have a situation where the developer goes out there, negotiates with the school district, the developer is on board, the school district is on board, the city administration is recommending approval to the council, and the council still has the discretion at that point to say, no, this agreement does not obligate the council to accept it if there is an agreement down the road to that effect. It's the vision, it's the roadmap to get there. Oh, it's the one on the left. I keep clicking the one on the right. Sorry. All right. The second purpose of the pilots here is to service the debt incurred in connection with the issuance of bonds that will be sold to monetize the pilots. As we all know, we're talking about exempting real estate taxation effectively for 30 years or whatever duration is agreed upon here. And it comes, real estate taxation or the pilots come incrementally. Every 6 months you get payment of real estate taxation, and the way that it works in Ohio, you even get it in arrears for the year before. So the development has to happen and before the money starts flowing in. So to finance the development, the developer would have to go on the market and have bonds issued, debt issued, that will be serviced by these future revenues. So that's what the pilots will be there to do. They will service the debt that will be issued to finance the cost of the improvements that are financed through those pilots. Two critical points here. The development agreement is very explicit. The city is not issuing any debt. To the extent that any debt is issued, it's going to be issued by a port authority, either the Lorain County Port Authority or another port authority, not the city, will not be issuing the debt. Number two, whatever debt is issued by a port authority, the city is not putting its full faith and credit behind that debt. The only obligation on the city that comes with respect to that debt is the transfer to pay the service out of that account that we established, that special fund that will have the pilots in it. They will be used to pay the debt. So what you do is some kind of an agreement between the city and the port authority for the city to, whenever the payments come due, to send the money from the fund, whatever money is in that fund. The city doesn't have to make any shortage. That's not the city's obligation to send the money from that fund to the port authority to service that debt, to make your loan payments, if you wish. Except these are bonds, but that's how it will be used to service the bonds. Again, there is an agreement that will have to happen between the city and the port authority. Typically, sometimes they're called cooperative agreements. Don't get hung up on the name of an agreement. You can call it whatever you want to call it. It's what the terms of that agreement provides. The third component of the pilots is for the city to purchase the public park and to make the improvements to it, which is what everybody has talked about here and one of the big incentives for the city to do what it's doing. Again, we've said this before, the city will not issue any debt, will not pledge its good faith and credit behind the debt, and the purpose of the pilots would be to service the debt. Lastly, and I think that the next speaker will go more into this, is before any TIF ordinance is initiated, the costs of the public infrastructure to be constructed in conjunction with the project and the value of the proposed exemptions from real property taxation on the value of the power plant property once it's improved as proposed by ALERG will need to be determined by ALERG to the satisfaction of the city administration, to the satisfaction of the Port Authority issuing the bonds that will be paid via pilots, and ultimately to the satisfaction of the city council. The one actually even most important piece in all of this, I've listed the three and those are very critical for the approvals. They have to satisfy the bondholders, the underwriter, whoever is going to purchase, ultimately the bondholders, the value of those bonds, that they're secure bonds, that there is going to be enough revenue coming from that development to issue the bonds. So they have to, these bonds will go through ratings and they will be rated. They will have to satisfy a rating agency and the bondholders that that there is going to be enough revenue coming in to service that debt. But basically from that study, that's how we will determine the proposed exemptions, the value, even the district. There's a map to the development agreement. Again, it's a vision. It doesn't mean that ultimately if something is approved that that's the actual map that will come before the city council. It's all going to depend on what development, what agreements happen. At this point, it's the vision, it's the concept, what we're trying to do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike or to Todd to introduce Mike. But again, I will repeat it one more time. What Mike is going to present is a hypothetical. I can't say this enough. It's not an actual study of this specific development, what it will produce, he's trying to give you an example of how these projects work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, Todd Davis, outside counsel to Avon Lake. And I think just to emphasize something that Majid said, if it wasn't clear, this is a hypothetical that we're talking about. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. But, all kidding aside, I think Majid and Jordan did a really nice job kind of explaining in words, what a TIF is. I think what has been missing from this discussion is hearing from a non-lawyer and a financial person who can take you through an example and show you how the numbers actually work. And that's what Mike Malley is going to do. Mike Malley is with Nickton Consulting. I've known Mike for about 15 years or so. I met him he's the executive director of an organization called the Surplus Property Roundtable, which is a group of the largest owners of brownfield sites in the world. He does quite a bit of financial work on behalf of numerous companies as part of that organization. But most importantly for purposes of tonight, Mike does a lot of work with US EPA and communities, and especially in the context of grants and underwriting and working with US EPA and local communities, talking about tax structures, talking about TIFs, really trying to get granular with respect to how the TIF process works. And so when I was talking to Mike recently about this project, I thought it would be a really good and helpful idea to have Mike present an example of how the TIF would work in this context. So what I hope to have Mike do is to take you through an example, to connect how the TIF process works with the bond underwriting itself and how those two kind of work together. In my mind, I think about it, we have these concepts that seem somewhat foreign, but it's really not that challenging. if you purchased a house and you have a mortgage, you've kind of gone through this similar process. The bank issues debt against the house and you pay it off in increments. The mechanics of it aren't that different. There's a lot of additional moving pieces, which Mike is going to take you through, but conceptually, it's just not that complicated. So we hope with this presentation that Mike is going to be able to kind of take you through this process, show you the different examples, and give you a chance to ask questions about how the mechanics work. So with that, Mike now.
Todd, thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you, Mayor, City Council members, and all in the room attending this meeting tonight. As Todd said, my name is Mike Malley. I am a consultant that specializes in brownfield redevelopment, including tax increment financing and bond modeling, with extensive experience with U.S. EPA and various communities throughout the U.S. Over the years, I've supported many municipalities in leveraging financial tools that drive economic growth and development in these communities. So as you've heard from the previous speakers, TIF is a very well accepted financial mechanism for spurring redevelopment and economic growth in communities like yours. Jordan and Majid did a great job of describing TIF and paving the way for my presentation this evening. Tonight, I'll present a hypothetical TIF model and a hypothetical bond model, illustrating to you how these mechanisms can be used to promote strategic investment and sustainable growth in communities like yours. I look forward to walking you through these models and addressing any questions you may have when we come to the question and answer period. So at this moment, I'm going to do the awkward share screen. I'm going to take just a minute to pull up my presentation, so bear with me while I do that. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen. Great. So again, this presentation is all about understanding tax incremental financing, as we refer to it as TIF, and bonds, and we're going to represent a hypothetical case to demonstrate how these financial mechanisms work in supporting redevelopment. So what we're going to do today is demonstrate the use of these TIF models to showcase how future increments can finance redevelopment projects and illustrate how these districts operate, explain how property taxes and property values and tax increments increase over time. To the redevelopment, highlight the flow of incremental tax revenues towards financing improvements and repaying the bonds, and then provide insights into the key inputs and outputs used in the TIF bond models, including property values, taxing entities, tax rates, bond rates, and so forth. And then the outputs, the important information that comes from those inputs. It shows us the cumulative tax revenue, total incremental tax revenue, and bond amortization schedules and other outputs that these models produce. So piggybacking on Jordan and Majid, we want to make sure that everybody understands that the TIF and bond models in this presentation are illustrative and based on hypothetical scenarios, not a specific project or actual data. Key considerations that we took into account here are, these are for demonstration purposes only, to illustrate to you how these models would work from a financial perspective, give you a better understanding of what could be considered complex, but in fact is really not. The local models, or I should say the model inputs and outcomes, obviously will vary, based on actual projects, the regulatory conditions, market demand, and actual tax data. And then lastly, the presentation is intended to illustrate general concepts and should not be relied upon for financial decisions or commitments. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on a couple of these slides because, as I said earlier, Majid and Jordan did such a great job of teeing this presentation up. The big issue and the big takeaway should be that TIF encourages investment in undeveloped areas without increasing the current tax rates. How a TIF works is basically a four-step process. A feasibility study is prepared by the developer to demonstrate whether the proposed TIF district is viable. And then a TIF development agreement is executed between the developer and the municipality. A TIF district is established and the existing tax base is frozen at the pre-development levels. So the value of the taxation today is what we're going to refer to as the tax base. And that tax base is frozen throughout the term of the TIF. As the property values increase due to redevelopment, the additional tax increment generated by this increase is directed towards repaying the bonds instead of going to the general tax pool. The pre-development tax base continues to flow to the traditional taxing entities just as it currently does today. So a brief overview of TIF bonds. Port authorities, cities, and municipalities can issue TIF bonds to cover the upfront development costs such as infrastructure, environmental remediation, or public amenities like parks. TIF bonds are typically revenue bonds versus general obligation bonds, as Majid explained. So these bonds are not backed by the full faith and credit of the municipality, but are dependent upon the revenue generated from the increased increment in the value of the property. The revenue bonds are the primary funding source and upfront capital for the improvements, and they're repaid solely through the future tax increments that are generated by the increased property values within the TIF district. If the increment is insufficient, bond repayment may be at risk unless the additional revenue sources are pledged. And I want to make a note here in regard to this particular project, Avon Lake City Interim Development Agreement structure. Avon Lake would not be at risk for any insufficient raising of the increments in the funds needed to repay the bonds. ALERG or the vertical developer must backstop any of those bonds if required by the bond underwriters. But also know that these bonds can be backstopped by bond insurance or bond reserve funds, and know that that is commonly done. So let's get on to the actual models themselves. For the TIF model inputs, we're going to look at current and projected property values when fully developed, current and projected fully developed assessed property values, the taxing entities, mill rates, and the effective tax rate after any deductions, the TIF duration, annual property depreciation rate. As you can be aware that real estate does increase in value in time for many circumstances. And what we want to do is make sure that we capture the appreciation rate in the tax increment, and I'll explain to you how that's done. The TIF model outputs will be the base revenue in year one, the cumulative base revenue over the TIF period, so the base revenue times the period number of years in the TIF period, the total TIF tax generated from the increment, and then the incremental tax value above the base that is established for any particular project. For the bond models, we'll have a bond amount, an interest rate, and the bond term in years. Typically, the bond term in years equals the TIF term as well. And the bond model outputs will be the amortization schedule. Be the amortization schedule and the total principal and interest paid over the bond term, which is what we'll refer to as the debt service amount. So for this particular hypothetical TIF and bond model assumptions, let me just run through a couple of details for you. In this example, in this illustration, we're going to use a TIF term of 30 years. we're going to assume that the current property value is $1.5 million. That $1.5 million is the market value of the property today, not the assessed value of the property. We'll get to that a little bit later. The fully developed property we're going to assume is $100 million. So the investment that occurs during the development period and when that property is fully developed and stabilized will have a value of $100 million. Again, that's the market value. In the state of Ohio, there's something called an assessment ratio. That assessment ratio is 35%. So to calculate the assessed value of any property in the state of Ohio, you take the 35% and multiply it by the current value of the property. You also do the same for the future value of the property. In the Lorain County, the effective tax rate is 29.2733. This was gained from the Lorain County 2023 taxes, including the special districts. And then we will plug that information into the TIF model to demonstrate how the TIF model works. Finally, the development period for this project has been assumed to be 5 years. So the day you first put a shovel in the ground to 5 years out, when it's fully developed, stabilized, and approaching full market value, will be 5 years. For the purposes of the bond model, we've assumed a $60 million bond. The term of that bond is going to be 30 years and an interest rate of 4%. So let's introduce the TIF and bond financial models. So I'm going to try and make this as easy as I can, as simple as I can. You're going to see a lot of numbers on the screen as I pull up the financial models, but we're going to break them down into very simple terms and help you understand how they work. Again, the objective is to demonstrate how these models can serve as tools to inform and quantify the TIF increment to fund redevelopment and drive community growth. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing again. I'm going to go to the TIF model and pull that up. So bear with me for just a minute while I stop sharing and bring up the next presentation. Okay, tell me if you can see that on your screen. Now I'm going to make it bigger because I suspect that the print may be fairly small. Is that right? Let me make this a little bit larger. Tell me when you are comfortable with what is shown.
Maybe a little bit
Keep
more.
going.
Yeah. That's all right.
How's that look? Good?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so getting back to the assumptions in the model, as you may recall, the value that we're using today for the current property value of the property is going to be $1.5 million. The developed property value is going to be $100 million. We talked about the assessment ratio. So 35% times the current value of the property is $525,000. The fully developed assessed value of the property at $100 million would be $35 million. So these would be the basis of the tax that's being paid currently and into the future. In this column here, we have the taxing entities that are comprised of the school district, county health, county joint vocational schools, cities and villages, special districts, the library, and what we call a commercial industrial reduction factor. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. This information comes from the 2023 Lorain County. So these values right here, the millages, the values that you see here in red are the mill rates from that 2023 county tax rate. Note that the mill rates are based on $1,000 of assessed property value. So the simple math in figuring out taxes for any particular property, and in this one in particular, which is again hypothetical, is multiplying this school district mill rate of 69.894 by the current value of the property. That same analysis is done for each of the taxing entities that result in a taxation that is unique to that entity. In this particular case, the full rate of this particular project is 99.69%, which results in a taxable value today, adding all of these up, of $52,340. After we apply this commercial industrial reduction factor, this is really a tool that municipalities use to account for how properties may change in value, either upward or downward. It's essentially a cushion to allow the municipality to collect a steady rate of taxes. I won't get into it much more than that, but know that it's a deduction from the full tax rate. It is unique to every municipality. This would be unique to Lorraine as well. But know that you subtract this from the effective rate, from the total full rate, to get the effective rate. So in this particular case of the property valued at market value of $101.5 million, the current assessed value of $525,000, the annual tax for that property would be $41,618. Let's jump to the annual tax rate at full development. So the same math applies for every one of these taxing entities, but it goes directly to the fully developed assessed value of the property. So in this particular case, let's use the school district. At full development, which we said was 5 years, taxes paid to the school district would be $2.446 million. And so on for each of these following entities. So at the end of the day, the effective rate under full development, the city would collect $2.774 million in taxes under full development. So let's go to this hypothetical project and a development schedule. As you know, as we noted earlier, the development period is 5 years. That is, the property develops starting with a shovel in the ground today and extends out 5 years where it's developed in phases. Again, this is a hypothetical, and we're using it for illustrative purposes only. So the developed property value increases annually over that 5-year development period by increasing this value and doubling it in this value, adding that to this value and that one, until you ultimately get to the $100 million value that we talked about up here. Same for the assessed value. The assessed value of the property is $525,000 today, which is this value here. When the property increases in value over the development period, the assessment value starts to increase incrementally as well. So going back now to the annual TIF revenue, this is the base tax revenue, year one, using the 35% assessment ratio to get the $7 million, so $7 million is 35% of $20 million. And then the effective rate multiplied by the assessed value in year one, the $554,000 would be paid in taxes. So on and so forth through the 5-year development period, where at the end of the 5-year development period, you'll see this number here equals this number here, which is the assessed value of the fully developed property. Now, what I'm going to show you here is, this is a 30-year TIF. For the purposes of demonstration, I've hid some columns, but know that the TIF would then run out through the year 2054. And that would be the 30 years for which the property is fully developed and stabilized over a 25-year period post the 5-year development period. As you can see, we're going to use a 3% property appreciation rate. And we mentioned that before, that we're going to appreciate the property by an annual rate of 3%. You can see here that by applying that 3%, the property value over that 25-year period from stabilization, from full development, results in a property value of $203 million and change. Similarly, if we go back to the assessed property value at the end of the 30-year period, the assessed value of the property will be $71 million, which is 35% of the market value. Now let's go to the TIF revenue, which is what we're all here to explore. Over the 30-year period of the TIF, as we march out towards year 30, the total TIF revenue generated will be $106 million and change. So this is the sum of all the annual taxes paid in that TIF period. So that's a very significant number, as you can see. What that does then is allow us to actually look at how the increment is formed and used. And again, this is an example. There are other ways in which there can be some nuances to how the TIF is actually calculated. But for the purposes of this presentation, the increment percentage, that is the amount of the increment that goes to support the project, is going to be 100%. In some cases, it could be 90%, it could be 85%, it could be 95%. That remaining percentage would then go back into the general funds. But in this case, we're allocating 100% of the increment to the project. As you recall, we had the base tax amount of $41,618. That's year one. If we multiply the base tax amount by 30 years, that gets us to 1.248 million, which is the amount of tax that would go to the general fund over the 30-year period. That number would be the same number as if the property were never developed, but the base tax rate remained the same. The 30-year TIF tax revenue is $106 million, which is that number I showed you off to the screen here. And then by subtracting the base 30-year tax amount from the increment, you get what we call the actual increment itself, which is the 30-year tax revenue above the base. So $105 million is generated as the increment. I'm going to show you a bond model, but know that this number right here is the number that is the interest and principal paid on that $60 million bond that we assumed. So what we want to make sure is that the 30-year increment is always greater than the 30-year cost of the principal and interest of the bond. In this case, we do have a net positive, so the increment would be able to fund the payment of the bond. So I think what's important to understand is, what does this look like 30 years down the road when we're in the post-TIF term revenue stage? So we're going to look at the post-TIF term revenue impact developed versus the undeveloped property. So in year 30, where the TIF has ended, the school district, given all the other assumptions that we have in this model, would generate $3.9 million to the school district, and so on through the other taxing entities, ultimately resulting in an effective tax rate of $4.4 million in that given year. This is year 30 with the project fully developed. If the project was not developed, the property remained vacant, the effective rate again would be $41,618. The net difference between the increment value minus the base value is $4.4 million. Now know that this column right here is for year 30 and beyond. So for every year beyond, this would be roughly, approximately, the tax revenue collected for that project after the TIF term had expired. So I'll take a deep breath. And what I want to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to bring up the bond model just to show you briefly how a bond model does work. As Todd so aptly referred to it, it's just like a mortgage amortization schedule, but we'll show you how we get to calculate the principal and interest of that bond. So I'm going to stop sharing again and bring up the bond model. And let me make this larger for you. Tell me if can you see that?
Small. Keep going.
How's that look?
Very good.
Good.
Thank you. That's good.
Okay. So this is a 30-year bond calculator. As we made the assumption, the hypothetical bond amount is $60 million. The interest rate that we're using for this demonstration is 4%. The 30-year municipal bonds are trading anywhere from 3.8 to 4.2, depending upon the bond rating. AAA is 3.8, single A is 4.2, and double A is roughly 4%. So we're going to use this for illustrative purposes, knowing that it's in the ballgame of what municipal bonds are paying today. Just like any other amortization schedule, this is the periods, these are the months that are going to be, the payments are going to be made. Going back to the 30-year term, we're going to make 12 monthly payments. And that monthly payment is going to be $286,000 and $499. So this is your amortization schedule right here. So I'll roll through this quickly, taking you all the way down to month 36, 360, I should say. These numbers right here reflect the summary up in the top page right here where I'm pointing right now. You'll see that what we're showing here is the principal paid is $60 million, the original amount of the bond. The interest paid at 4% is $43 million. When you combine the principal paid plus the interest paid, the total paid is $103 million and some change. So that's how the bond model works. So that is it for my presentation today. I want to thank you for bearing with all these numbers, and I know that it can sound confusing, and I hope it sheds some clarity on how a TIF works, how the bond works together with the TIF to repay the initial improvements that are invested in a project like this, and happy to answer any questions at the right period in time in this meeting when the question and answer session is called into session. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate all the information. Jen, I don't know if you want to.
I would like to have council ask questions. We're going to start at this end. Mr. Zuber, your hand's up.
I just have a question. If we can get the last two presentations, if we can get those in writing, copies of them for all of us.
Are you talking about his work table?
Yeah, I'm talking about the last two presentations.
Thank you. Is that possible, Mr. Malley? Mr. Malley, can you hear me?
We can make sure.
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Mike, can you hear?
I can hear, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't hear whether that was directed to me, Todd.
No, yeah, so they just would like, Councilman Zuber has asked for a copy of the presentations. I'm sure that's not a problem being made.
No, not at all. I mean, it's a hypothetical situation. There's nothing confidential there, Todd. Happy to provide that to you so it
It's the
can be distributed.
worksheet.
Yes.
Worksheets.
Yeah, that will include the model, the worksheets, everything that you need.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Super, anything else? Okay. Coming down, Mr. Smith?
I don't have any questions right now.
Anything more, Mr. Arnold, at this point?
Yeah, Mike, I think you might have missed a slide. There was some examples, some Ohio TIF districts in the area.
Yeah, I added that slide, and I'd be happy to pull that up just to give you an example of some of those. Let me do that for you. Well, let's see, where did that go?
Previous information that was researched and made available. There's about 1,850 active TIF districts in the state of Ohio currently. So this is a very common tool used for exactly this purpose, which is to facilitate major projects. And I think, as Mike said, you can't find, it's very hard to find a project like this with these kinds of complexities without using an incentive like a TIF. And I think that's pretty clear. And certainly, you would be competing with other jurisdictions to attract something similar to this piece of property. Mike, you got that? Go ahead.
Yeah, can you see that now?
Yes.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research within the state of Ohio to identify TIF districts. These again are for illustrative purposes, but to emphasize and validate, as our previous speakers talked about, that TIFs are commonly deployed at blighted or underdeveloped sites to attract the type of interest from investors and developers that are necessary to make their projects successful, but also to implement public improvement projects, including infrastructure improvements, public amenities, and things of that nature. And you can see that I've just pulled up 4 of these that are local to Cleveland and Columbus. The Flats East Bank, Cleveland, was a $500 million TIF with an initial 30-year TIF period. It was extended by another 30 years for various public improvement projects. The Arena District in Columbus, which was a $65 million in TIF funds for, again, various improvement projects. The Cleveland Gateway District. This is a massive redevelopment project. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's estimated to generate between $3 and $7 billion of TIF over 42 years, including public improvements and infrastructure improvements. And then lastly, the Eastern Town Center in Columbus, which is a $36.4 million TIF over 30 years. Again, improving public amenities and including infrastructure improvements. So just as an example to illustrate that this is a very, very common redevelopment tool, particularly to attract developers who may not be interested in a particular project because it can't work economically, but for the TIF that's generated to support the public improvements and amenities that are necessary to make these projects work.
I would note, having worked on lawyer for the Flats, this was a critical component to the success, having it have the kind of investment that was made in that project. The Arena District, also in Columbus, was a major brownfield redevelopment project that went through the VAP, at least in certain circumstances and components. Also used a similar mechanism. The Cleveland Gateway project is obviously a new project, but there are some brownfield components to that as well. I can't really talk to Easton Town Center, but you can see the theme on large-scale projects with this kind of infrastructure or other public need using TIF and bonding to help the feasibility of the projects.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Arnold?
No.
Okay, we're going to go down to this side. Mr. Shamir?
Nothing right now.
Thank you. Ms. Gentry?
So, I know this is all hypothetical, but if the property value increases higher than the anticipated amount in the TIF, what happens? Does that,
Mike, can you,
Can he hear
I'm
us?
not sure, you should probably
I'm
direct.
having a little bit, trouble hearing the
You're gonna have to
questions from
repeat
the
your
audience,
question.
so if you could repeat that, that would be terrific.
So the question is, what if the property value increases greater than what the property value model currently shows? What happens to that additional incremental funding?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about were the various tools to backstop some of these funds, which would include either developer with a personal guarantee, but knowing that the city would never be at risk for having to pay the insufficient funds. Many times bond writers will require bond insurance, which can be procured to ensure that if there's any difference in insufficient funds to the increment itself, that bond can be used to make up that difference. And so those are some of the mechanisms that can be used to make sure that at the end of the day, the increment is funded, or the increment that funds the bonds is ultimately repaid to the bondholders.
Yeah, I think her question was a little different.
the opposite?
Yeah, so it was, what if it's wildly successful and there's extra money in the kitty?
Yeah.
What happens to that money goes, presumably goes into the fund. So you've got additional money that goes into that fund that can be used for other improvements in the TIF district, other projects, or anything else that would be an eligible expense within that district.
Yeah, good point. I'm sorry I misunderstood the question. So what's interesting we played with the model and we looked at, for instance, a 4% and a 5% appreciation rate, which increased the TIF increment, I think, by $10 or $12 million. So there would have been instead of a $3 million excess, there would have been a $15 million excess. A lot of times that is an internal decision made by the municipality. It could be part of the development agreement, how those excess funds are managed and held. But know that that's a good problem to have.
Sorry, I'm trying to read. So this TIF covers more than just the lakefront property. TIF district is much larger. So I'm trying to reconcile in my head the TIF property versus, and that amount is not specifically for the lakefront. Is that my understanding? The property that Avon Lake is purchasing. Does that make sense?
No.
No,
Could you-
okay. So the
It
TIF
didn't make sense to me,
yeah.
so
So,
would you mind?
oh, sorry. So the TIF district is much larger than the specific property that Avon Lake is purchasing
It's
on
the
the
use of
lakefront,
the
right?
sort. Yeah, that's correct. So the TIF district is the area where the revenues are generated to support the TIF itself. So if there's improvements within that district, that's where the taxes are generated.
Mm-hmm.
Separate. We tried to do it, I think last week, talked a little bit about that, sources versus uses
Mm-hmm.
of the funding. The uses of the funding, at least the ones that we've identified so far, are articulated in the interim development agreement that Majid and Jordan went through. And I think he did a really good job, going through those different line items, but the big ones obviously are $15 million to acquire the public park property, another $15 million for the improvements, and then they'll have to, as Majid has said, there'll have to be an agreement with the school district. That's not yet.
Yeah.
We don't know what that's going to look like at this point, but that's going to be up to the developer to make sure that they can reach an agreement with the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Let me chime in on one other subject that maybe touches on part of your question. When you talk about the TIF district, at the risk of sounding like I keep saying the same thing over and over, there is no TIF district right now. In the interim development agreement, there is an exhibit that shows essentially a potential TIF district that could be established as part of the TIF in conjunction with this project. It covers more than just the power plant property, because it may be that the council determines ultimately that the property that will be subject to both the application of pilots and improvements may extend beyond the power plant property. You may determine that you see the development not being limited to only the power plant property, but instead some of the adjacent properties. It may be that Allerg or the developers that it works with determines to acquire other adjacent property and develop that as part of their project. So again, the notion here that there is a framework for any potential TIF, it goes hand in hand with that TIF district that you see in the interim development agreement. It's the possible TIF district depending on what development activities are anticipated as part of the negotiation, and what improvements, what areas there might be improvements, whether those are sewer improvements, road improvements, whichever. So again, it's not established, but it may or may not conform to what you see in the agreement.
I think just to supplement that a little bit, so one of the other things that I think has been taken for granted, and certainly we've talked about it kind of conceptually and backing into the number of us, and we used it in this hypothetical as a $60 million bond, backing into the $15 million the amount is no more than 25% of the available TIF revenue. That's what the interim development agreement says, at least for the purchase of the property. So people have been backing into, well, that necessarily means that you're going to have a $60 million bond. That's not yet certain. That bond amount can move up and down based on the underwriting and the needs of the development itself. We've identified in the interim development agreement $15 million for the purchase and then $15 million for improvements. Now, it's possible, up to council and depending on how the negotiations go, I'm sure the $15 million purchase price is probably going to stay the same, but there may be some flexibility in terms of improvements, so that number could go up or down. Other uses for the TIF revenue, in terms of other infrastructure and other things, perhaps it's not an additional $30 million, perhaps it's a lower number. So to Mike's point, this is going to be developed in the future based on underwriting. The feasibility is going to have to be backed up by the developer, and that's how we're going to ultimately be able to present something that makes sense to council or something that doesn't make sense to council. That will be up to your discretion. But I just wanted to let you know that those are moving targets at this point.
So in the interim agreement, we're talking about, so if we don't use a TIF to fund the project, then the interim agreement is null and void, and they can then sell the property to whomever, and we lose the option to purchase the property.
It's crystal clear in the agreement.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the public knows, because I've seen a lot of discussion about this, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, this whole approach in the interim development agreement that we've established here is dependent on the TIF being passed.
Right.
So if there is no TIF that is passed, then certainly it's up to Allerg to not move forward with this project. They'll still be the property owner, but I think all of these discussions will have to take a dramatic turn.
Okay.
I would say for the worse, personally.
Mrs. Gentry, anything else?
No, thank you.
Mr. Shamir, you had your hand up. Yes.
Actually, I'll come back. Both, most of my questions are for Burns and Opner, so I'll wait this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Cos?
No, nothing at this time.
I have a couple questions. Okay. My first question has to do with use. And so.
I'm sorry.
Use has to do with
Use.
use. Okay. So we someday will be defining the actual TIF location on a map. We're going to call out the parcels. And then let's say that we go ahead with the TIF. Can those infrastructure funds be used anywhere else in the city if we have another need, or does that all have to be defined up front?
I believe it has to be in the TIF district itself, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, because there's been some discussions about that. That's why I'm bringing it up. There's another part that has been in discussions with a number of people that I've seen in the public arena, and I'd like to be clear about it.
Sure.
So if with the interim agreement, it talks about the 25%, which we're saying is $15,000 to acquire the parkland.
15 million.
I'm sorry, what did I say? 15,000? Oh, I'm so sorry. 15 million. Whoa, that went on a sale quick, didn't it? 15 million, and then 15 million to improve. The improvement is not to clean it up. It has to be cleaned up before we ever purchase it. The improvement is to actually improve it, whether that means putting, like you said, infrastructure, sewers and streets. There could be trees. There could be all kinds of things with the improvement. So 15 and 15 is 30. What happens to the other 30 million? If we're talking about a 60, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, of course. So that will be proposed in a budget by ALERG in connection with other eligible public improvements, roads, sewer, other infrastructure necessary to support the project. And it will be all laid out in a very specific budget.
So it's
that will be presented in the future.
It will be presented. It's never
Yes, absolutely.
It's never up
100%.
for grabs. Okay.
Yes.
I believe that we have asked our questions here. Mr. Mayor, anything from you, from the law director?
Nothing.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we wanted to have another round. Mr. Shamir, want to go in a different direction, if we could?
Can I follow up on what Ms. Fenderbosch asked? Now, the question was, if the funds are associated with the TIF district, it cannot be utilized for items outside of the TIF district. However, could it be utilized on initiatives that are associated with the TIF district? For example, supporting fire and fire department. I mean, as it sits, the capacity to respond to a 10-story building is limited. Could that fund be utilized to expand the fire service? That's just a question that just came up, so.
So I have no answer for that. I would have to, personally, that's not within my domain. Maybe perhaps Majid does.
I'll refer you to. This is going to be legalese, but it's the most. It's the definition of what public infrastructure improvement is in the revised code, for which the pilots could be used. Public infrastructure improvement includes, but is not limited to, public roads and highways, water and sewer lines, the continued maintenance of those public roads and highways and water and sewer lines, environmental remediation, land acquisition, including acquisition in aid of industry, commerce, distribution, or research, demolition, including demolition on private property when determined to be necessary for economic development purposes, stormwater and flood remediation projects, including such projects on private property when determined to be necessary for public health, safety, and welfare, the provision of gas, electric, and communication service facilities, including the provision of gas or electric service facilities owned by non-governmental entities when such improvements are determined to be necessary for economic development purposes, the enhancement of public waterways through improvements that allow for greater public access, and off-street parking facilities, including those in which all or a portion of the public space parking spaces are reserved for specific uses to be determined as necessary for economic. So it's a very broad definition, but I think I want to be very clear as to what that means, because I want to make sure we don't confuse two separate things. There is the pilots that go into the fund that the city uses, and it could be used for all of those things. Not to be confused with the debt, because when they go to the market and issue debt, and they're going to back it with they're going to service that debt with those pilots, that's going to be limited to the purposes of the debt, and there's no way, the city's not putting its full faith and credit behind that. That debt is going to be for the project, but in terms of the pilots, the definition of public infrastructure is pretty broad in the revised code.
One of the other things I would just point out in connection with that question, we did talk to the fire chief when we were talking about the height limitations of the buildings and what the fire department would be comfortable servicing in that 10-story building, but was within what we were advised at the time per that question that Avon Lake City Fire could service.
So if I may continue, on the upside discussion that was had with respect to the project being extremely successful, I guess any upside of that benefit would have to be negotiated by the schools for them to get any benefits out of that upside.
I would say that it's fair game if there is an upside that could be part of a discussion.
Okay. Now, again, if there is no TIF, there's no project. So that assumed, there are a couple of questions that I've got with respect to the agreement itself. It says the city administration agrees to support the land developer's effort to secure the Avon Lake School District's agreement for the largest TIF exemption feasible to support the project. The discussion is that the school district will be negotiating this, and really the city administration there's no relation. So I am unsure on how this fits into the realm of things. I mean,
so the intent is, the intent of the language was that the administration would support the developer's efforts to negotiate an agreement with the school district. But it's going to be up to, they don't want the city administration coming back and then objecting if those two parties are able to reach an agreement amongst themselves. They just wanted to make sure, I'm putting words in the developer's mouth, and certainly the developers here, or at least a representative of the developer, I'm sure is happy to answer that question.
well, I understood. I guess what comes up is for the largest TIF. When I read this, it sounds like a stick. So I'm just wondering how the verbiage and maybe some clarity from Burns and Ochner can shed light on what the largest TIF.
Here, as a practical matter, you saw earlier when we were describing what the limits are on a TIF without the school district's agreement. It can't exceed 75% of the incremental increase in value or a 10-year term. And it's largest TIF to support the project. So let's go back to thinking about the modeling that Mike was showing. That was a 100% TIF for 30 years. As you saw in some of the other examples that he showed, Gateway District, Flats East, Arena District in Columbus, those also used 30 years. That's generally viewed as the longest time period that TIFs are negotiated. And so in real terms, to your question, Councilman, in all likelihood, what we would anticipate ALERG to be negotiating for is 100% 30-year TIF. That their modeling is going to be based on that kind of TIF. So going back to the specific language of the interim development agreement, what it means is that the administration in those negotiations and before council will support that, as opposed to saying, we don't like that. It's It's up to you to decide whether you don't like it and to vote that up or down. But under the development agreement, what ALERG essentially negotiated for is, look, we want an advocate in the administration in these efforts. If the administration were, for instance, telling the school district, don't do it, that would undermine ALERG's negotiation efforts. But that's not to say that it's a stick in any way, because the stick, if anybody has it, is the city council's stick. To say we're not going to pass this unless this is what it provides for the school district or anybody else. But before the city council has a say in that, the school district will have negotiated with ALERG and will have presumably reached an agreement. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything before city council to vote on.
So I would assume that there would be a economic model already to be presented at the time that it comes to council.
I would expect it to be presented to the school district before it comes to council, and to be used by the school district in its negotiation. To the extent that again, using Mike's hypothetical as an example, you heard him say that he assumed the 3% appreciation. I don't think any of us sitting here, having watched that, and that's part of the benefit of looking at that kind of hypothetical, might say, well, what if it's 3.5%? What if it's 4%? What if it's 5%? Just like Mike said he had also modeled. None of us would be surprised if the school district in the negotiation said, we want to look at those also so we can see what kind of dollars those generate, so we can give consideration to negotiating for a portion of that increased revenue if it appreciates at a greater rate. I'm not advocating on behalf of the schools, but again, we all saw the same presentation, so we can all sense sort of the contours of that negotiation.
Well, the reason I was asking that is because I've had side discussions over the past several weeks with Mr. Davis, and this is the modeling and everything else was touched on, and I just want clarity on how this will be brought forth.
It has to be done through that
Exactly.
kind of modeling. It has to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on city council? Because if you could stay up, I have a question to follow up. Thank you. And that question is something that I've brought up often, and that I'm an advocate for the libraries, and that state law states that the schools need to be negotiated with when it is over 75%, right? And also your timetable. And I know that other locations have included the libraries with that, with TIFs. And there's such a small percentage, but it means a lot to them. At what point are they brought to the table with the ALERG through the negotiations?
As a practical matter, given if council is intending to signal to ALERG that council wants to see a TIF agreement, an ordinance that includes a portion of the TIF revenue going to the libraries or to any of the other taxing authorities. Again, the advantage of the modeling, we could see where those tax dollars go. I think you are probably in the process of delivering a clear message.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. At this point in time, I see no one else on council wanting to come forward with anything. We're going to go into the public input for the work sessions. And
Can I just make
yes,
one more
sir.
statement,
Come on
if
up
you don't
and
mind?
make your
Sorry to
summary,
interrupt,
and
but
then-
but I just because you're asking very good questions, everyone's asking great questions that are certainly fair game. So this is a negotiation and a discussion, and all of these pushing and pulling exercises are going to go to the feasibility of the project for the developer. And ultimately, the numbers have to pencil out for the benefit of the developer, or, you know, one of the main objectives that you tasked us with trying to do was to find a way to acquire a major public park and to have one that's not just a raw piece of land, but have it improved. So we understand that there are competing priorities in the community. The school is important, the library is important, the public park is important. You know, these are all things that the council has to weigh. We think that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to open up access to the lake. And that has to be paramount, at least from my perspective. But in your wisdom, you'll decide what is most important to the community and how to negotiate to make it happen.
Thank you, sir. We're now going to open up to public input. If you could come forward and give us your name, and you have 3 minutes for public input. Who would like to be first? Mrs. Baird.
Hello, I'm Deb Beard, 197 Moore Road. I appreciate the presentation tonight. I got a better understanding of the TIF. The one thing I am concerned about is I did watch the meeting last week, and it was brought out what the TIF district was going to include. That is what I am here about tonight. I was a little upset when I heard that Avondale was included in this district, and that the area around the power plant was included in the district. There is, I don't know if many of you understand that Avondale was taken over by CEI, by eminent domain, and moved 50 people, 50 families or more off of Avondale in the late 60s, early 70s because of the energy crunch. CEI basically, took away our land, and now CEI does own most of the property and they don't want to do anything. So including that area in the district is a very major concern to me because that is where I grew up, and knowing that now you are at this intent of whatever is going to be including Avondale. The shopping center, they can't really do any major improvements. There's only one parcel that they actually have that they've never done anything with. The stuff on the north side of Lake Road, east of the power plant, is going to be owned by Avon Lake City eventually, because that's going to go to the water department. So when they talk about the district, I'm really concerned about including this whole area. Like I said, Avondale is a very, very hot issue with me, and knowing that we were kicked off of the property by eminent domain, and now somebody wants to come and build eventually, whatever, is a very hot issue with me.
Thank you.
I do have a question. If you guys decide that Avondale is included in the district, are you going to contact the people that there's 2 residents that actually live on Avondale? There are companies on the south side of Avondale down by Walker Road that own property. Yes, the city owns 25 parcels in there along with CEI owning the rest. A lot of it is right-of-way along Walker Road. I've done my research. I know all about Avondale. Just wondering if the city is going to notify them to see what their thoughts are before it is included, if that's what you guys decide.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ted. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to come forward? Anyone else?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Gerald W. Phillips, 461 Windward Way. I'd like to go over the so-called interim development agreement, or this so-called non-binding letter of intent. Those words have been thrown out. I've read the agreement. Those are misnomers in the sense of the word non-binding and interim. You look at the interim agreement, it's a binding agreement, and there's obligations to purchase that land. And let's go to section 3 of the zoning, where it says the city administration shall support the property owner's application before the city planning commission and city council for the overlay district. We have a specific overlay district drafted by Ted Esborn with details already. ahead of time when it hasn't gone through the planning commission process. That's pretty indicative of the fact that there's a contract for zoning. Let's go to the next page where it says, City Council shall not unreasonably delay or condition its consideration of the adoption of the overlay district. Next paragraph, simultaneously with and as a condition of the adoption of the overlay district, the city administration shall initiate and support before the city planning commission and city council the rezoning. How about B, where it says, the city shall negotiate in good faith with the land developer for the acquisition of a public park on the property. How about number 5, where it says, city council adoption of a TIF ordinance shall be a precondition of the development of the property? How about further down in that paragraph 4? City council shall not unreasonably delay or consider its consideration for the TIF ordinance adoption. In the paragraph Mr. Shamir indicated, where it says the administration agrees to support the land developer's efforts to secure from the school district the largest feasible TIF to support the obligation. And on the next page, it says the city administration agrees to support. It's a very principle of law that there's always an implied obligation of good faith and fair dealing in every contract. We got express conditions, very specific, and if the city doesn't fulfill all those provisions I said, you know what you're going to get? And if ALERG doesn't like it, you're going to get a lawsuit. We already had their lawyer come up here and threaten to sue the city on the basis of a moratorium. So you think that this is non-binding, no obligations, doesn't put the city in the position of being sued? You guys are being misled.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Anybody else? Any questions? Any comments?
Mayor, before the next sentence,
Yes,
I
sir.
do have a question. Is there any way that we can have either Burns Offner or Mr. Davis respond to what was just said?
You have,
About-
to ask, you have to ask through the chair.
Oh, I am sorry, Madam Chair. Is there any way to get Burns Offner or Mr. Davis to respond to what was just said?
Madam Chair, if we could wait until the audience is done for them to respond, please.
Then that way they can respond one time.
Sure, thank you.
And they can answer perhaps multiple questions that might be coming up now. If you, okay, thank you.
William Zimmerman. So I have a problem with the fact, I've had 2 other attorneys look at this document. As Mr. Phillips has stated, it's a binding agreement. There's no letter of intent of a non-binding agreement. And I'm surprised that our law director hasn't brought that forward, unless he's playing on the other side. So from my standpoint, it sounds like there's more collusion again and corruption. And it's an ongoing issue. And now they're going to find another way to try to say, oh, look, you've agreed to all of these factors, now you have to do them. Now we're going to have to support whatever ALERG says. It's the bully of ALERG coming back to get us again. This has been a theme in this entire process. I don't understand why we're falling for it. I don't understand why we don't stand up to them and smack them in the face. At some point, you have to protect the citizens of the city. At some point. I don't understand. If I can find attorneys who can read through it and say that it's not what they claim it is, I would assume that we could as well. I just don't understand it. So, based upon that, ordinance number 24143, which is up for its 3rd reading, ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter
Sir,
into an interim
sir, we have to
agreement.
stay right on the work session. And what will be coming
Isn't
up?
this still part of the TIF? The agreement is very much, it
That's part of
considers the TIF in it.
Sir, that's part of the collective committee meeting. And so at the collective committee meeting, we will have public input also.
Yeah, which I want to speak about. They've gotten well over an hour and a half of time up here running through 5 different people when we get 3 minutes apiece.
That's correct, because
That
it was
is
a work
correct.
session for all of us to
That-
learn from. So.
I understand. So next work session, can I bring in 3 of my experts and let them come up here and have an hour and a half of time?
You're not a subject specialist, sir. We're
No,
bringing
I said
subject
I'll bring
specialists.
3 subject specialists who can do that. So I want an hour and a half of time so that they can do the same things that we've had to sit through this dog
No.
and pony show
It
for
won't
the
happen.
entire time. So it won't happen.
Not on my watch, no.
So it's not allowed because you're going to say it doesn't fit the same criteria that we just had to sit through.
Thank you.
It's ridiculous. The double standards that you have for the citizens versus ALERG and the project that you're trying to push. I don't understand why you don't look out for the citizens.
This is why we have our work sessions to educate everyone. Anybody else coming forward? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the work session. We're going to move on now to the collective committee meeting.
Madam
Oh, I'm
President.
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we were going to bring in our subject specialist. Sorry about that. Thank you. I got carried away in the emotion of the moment.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a couple of points.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Sure. With respect to the first comment about notification to the property owners, at the end of the day,
You're going
again-
to speak to me, please.
Oh, sure. At the end of the day, as we wanted to make sure the council does not have a TIF ordinance in front of it that it's considering tonight. When the negotiations happen, and at the end of the day, there will be a TIF ordinance. That TIF ordinance will have an actual TIF district. That TIF district, the council will hold a hearing on the TIF ordinance and will issue notification to the property owners that are within that TIF ordinance. But we're far from getting to that point at this point. But that's when the TIF ordinance itself, the hearing on the TIF ordinance takes place. With respect to my good friend Jerry Phillips' comments, I'd like to just point out that I don't think we've ever said that the agreement is not binding. We've been very clear that the term, it's an agreement, but the terms of the agreement expressly give council the discretion to approve or not to approve certain things. So a couple of points to explain out. Let's talk about the unreasonable delay, right, provision. It's not that the council shall not unreasonably delay the approval of any ordinance. It's that council shall not unreasonably delay the consideration of an ordinance. The decision ultimately is the council's decision. So for instance, when it comes to the TIF, let's read that language. The city council shall not unreasonably delay or condition its consideration of the TIF ordinance's adoption, provided, however, the city council shall have the right to approve or deny the adoption of the TIF ordinance in its sole and absolute discretion, with the understanding that the project may not be developed in the sole and absolute discretion of the land developer. So it's both ways. But the language is very express that the council is not obligated to approve anything. But yes, I mean, if something is presented to council, the council will not unreasonably, going through the normal legislative process is not unreasonable. That's very reasonable. It's going outside of the unreasonable process, delay the consideration. The simple answer to that is the council can deny something at some point if there is a complaint by the property owner. But the language is very clear in terms of the obligations on the council. And number two, it's that way for a reason. Because, for instance, when you talk about the rezoning of property, that is a legislative function that can't be delegated. So this council can't, I don't mean it this way, but that's the reality of it. We don't know when we come with a rezoning ordinance if it's the same council that will be here or a different council. Mm-hmm. And constitutionally, this council does not have the right to obligate a future council to adopt a rezoning ordinance. That's why the language is drafted that, because if we put a provision in here that obligated a future legislative body to adopt something, that would be an illegal provision even to have in place. And those are legislative decisions. That's why the obligations are on the administration to support something, not necessarily on the council to adopt or approve it, and any provision of that nature would be illegal in its own definition. And actually, I would even go just one step further to the question that Mr. Shamir asked about the largest TIF possible. The reason the language is that way is because we don't have the modeling yet. So we couldn't have specific numbers or anything of that nature. So the idea is we're trying to make sure that the administration would support the largest feasible TIF, but until you have the modeling, we don't even know what that is. And that's really what we're talking about. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just add, with respect to Mr. Phillips' statement regarding whether the letter of intent is binding or non-binding, there's a specific term in section D3 that basically says expressly it's a non-binding letter of intent. It's titled non-binding, it's titled letter of intent. It's not a full purchase agreement. Plain meaning of the agreement itself is such. It contemplates the drafting and the tendering for consideration of a full purchase agreement. I don't know how you can interpret it in any other way.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Okay, at this point, the public input session has ended, so the work session is ended. We're going to go on now to the collective committee meeting, and the purpose of the collective committee meeting is to prepare for next week's council meeting. Because of the holiday, it will be Tuesday, November the 12th, and at that meeting there will be votes, not at this meeting. Mr. Zuber, could you take us on with the Finance Committee with the very first item, please?
The first item is the Neighborhood Alliance. This is the old Meals on Wheels program. It's now through the Neighborhood Alliance. This is a yearly contract that we sign with them for $61,000 to show that it's our intent next year to use their services again to provide the Meals on Wheels. So this was voted out of the committee. We'll look for first reading next week and then pass it on the second reading at the second meeting in November.
Steve Gross was still there. Steve Gross was still there. Okay. We have a little technical thing going on here. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Zuber. So could you say your intent one more time, please? Your
The intent is to have this on for first reading next week, passage at the second meeting in November.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of council for Mr. Zuber? Mr. Zuber, your next item.
The next item is the quarterly transfers. That is something that we do on a quarterly basis. That's money passed out of the income transfer fund or the income tax transfer fund. And that would be on for next week for passage.
Thank you. Council members, any questions for Mr. Zuber? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to Mr. Cos. Mr. Cos, Public Safety and Health Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. The first item that we have is to advertise for requests for qualifications, RFQ, for a traffic impact analysis, and I would like to defer this one to the mayor for further discussion on it.
Thank you, Councilman Cos. So this relates to the Hanford, Lear Road, Liberty Rose area. We've had a lot of discussion up here in council regarding this, and Mr. Orlowski here, thank you for coming down. And so we want to make it so that we address all the issues that have arisen over all these past conversations, and that requires that a well-written scope of work is created, and then that will be created to for our request for qualifications to send out to request, I guess we call them engineering firms, traffic engineering firms, to provide us with their qualifications to do that type of analysis. We will then go through the process to choose a firm. Once that firm is chosen based upon the RFQ, then we'll negotiate a contract and begin the actual analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Cos?
Yeah, and I'd also like to include that Mr. Baker's in the audience as well too, and Liberty Rose.
Sorry, I didn't see him back there.
Is
Yeah,
is
thank
we,
you.
as per our
Rob?
discussions, Liberty Rose and surrounding streets are also going to be a part of this information gathering as we put together what the plan is going to be for that traffic study. So I didn't want you to think that we forgot about your area.
And the intent is 2024 to initiate this.
Yeah,
correct?
initiate in 2024, wouldn't be done until 25. And I would
Correct.
encourage anybody in the public to, specifically what you're looking for, just let us know. We'll
Let the mayor know.
incorporate the best we can.
If you could let the mayor know, he's really the point person on this. Mr. Cos and I have been working on residents' responses, and other department heads have been working on their specific part so that this could be pretty complex and comprehensive. Any comments from colleagues? Okay, we'll move on then to Public Service Committee. There's a traffic signal control.
Madam President,
Oh,
I
sorry.
had one other item.
Okay,
And that is the new liquor license for the Cleveland Pickleball Club.
yeah.
I think most residents have heard that the Cleveland Pickleball Club is operating or going to be located at 33625 Pin Oak Parkway. And this is for a new liquor license for D1, which is beer to be consumed on the premises. And this has been reviewed by the police chief, and he had no cause for concerns. And so I'm going to ask for a motion next week that the city not request a hearing for this new liquor license.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Cos? Yes. Mr.
Just that I don't know if beer and pickleball go together.
Find out.
We'll find out, right? This is, again, a private club, correct, Mr. Cos? Yes, okay. Okay, then we will go on to Public Service Committee. There will be a traffic signal controller replacement at Walker Road in Jaycox. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Liskovac, who can explain the process and where we are.
Yeah, good evening. So through the Pathmaster preemption project, it was determined that the existing equipment at Walker and Jaycox would not be sufficient to retrofit the preemption equipment that's coming in with that project. At that point, Fire Chief Betza had reached out to me to work with traffic signal providers to get a proposal put together to upgrade that intersection so that it can be fully installed with the Pathmaster equipment that's provided with the project. So I reached out to a couple of local companies, Signal Service and Lampion, for proposals on that, and then included in the is each proposal is included for review there. With the recommendation that I proposed also is to, while we're at this upgrade with the cabinet and controller, to also put in a UPS for battery backup. It's one of very few intersections that we have left that has no battery backup. So it would make sense at this point in time, if we're making that upgrade, to also include that. I know that Signal Service had the total package, which included battery backup there. But if you wanted to compare without, they were about $2,000 under the Lampion package at about $26,000. I didn't include that because, again, my recommendation would be to go for the full upgrade. Based on the favorable bid we got from Pathmaster in discussion with the mayor and the finance team, there's still funds left over in that project to cover this. So therefore, we would not be looking for an appropriation to get this project going.
Very good. So in other terms, it's within the budget because we have the funds. And because of needing to fit this in with the timetable, you need this to be next week's suspension of the rule emergency passage?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for our Public Works Director? Okay. Other business. I have turned in my resignation as the appointment of council representative on Planning Commission. With all the additional responsibilities I have as council president, I am recommending that council considers the appointment of Jeffrey Smith as the council representative to planning. And this would take effect at the first meeting in December, which is the first Tuesday of the month in December. Any questions among my colleagues? Any comments? Everybody knows Mr. Smith's resume, and I think he would be a great addition to the Planning Commission. Okay, third readings. Ordinance number 24143. Mr. Arnold, third readings.
Yes, this is the third reading, will be next week of the interim agreement that we talked about, interim development agreement that we talked about the past 5 weeks, including tonight. I don't really have any other comments on it. We talked about it a lot tonight.
And among my colleagues, any additional comments on this one? Okay. Ordinance number 24-148, the ordinance amending Planning and Zoning Code, Section 1224.01, accessory use and temporary use regulations for backyard chickens, coops, and runs. This is a text amendment. This is why we have had 3 readings of it and basically 6 opportunities with our CCMs for the public to comment on it. November the 12th, which is Tuesday, we will be having a public hearing. So those who are for it, against it, come to council meeting and speak your, have your voice speak forward about it. This is a third reading, so the vote will come up then on Tuesday. Any additional comments? Questions by my colleagues? Okay, we'll go on to Mr. Smith with ordinance number 24-154.
Thank you. The next 2 third reading items are for our assistant finance director and the senior program manager. They're on their third reading, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I think it's relatively self-explanatory.
Right.
Thank
Any
you.
questions from our colleagues? Okay. You've handled also ordinance 24-155 at the same time, sir, correct?
I did.
Very good. Okay. Now we're going to open it up to public input. You can speak on these items or any items that you'd like to for 5 minutes. Come forward with your name and address and give us your name and address again.
Madam Chairman,
Thank you.
3266 Hanford Boulevard. I've been here many, many times recently because of the proposal to possibly open Hanford Boulevard. Both my and my neighbors back and forth with council has really been positive. I wanted to state that publicly because, and also I want to thank several of you for your time. I and others had 2 meetings with Mr. Shamir, 2 with Mrs. Fenderbosch, 2 with the mayor, several with Mr. Hebert, as well as a few public information requests over and over again, as well as Mr. Esborn, Councilman Arnold, and Smith as well. You know, this began with us on 100% with very different views of this project. But we didn't take sides. We talked, and we certainly didn't get all we wanted by any stretch of the imagination. But then again, the city didn't either. We got a gate that provides, at least for now, some traffic help, let's just put it to you that way. Relief. The city got an emergency crew access with the police chief and fire chief were certainly very adamant about. And both of us got a traffic study. I'm very happy to hear from the mayor that our input will be welcomed in that regard. And I spoke very briefly to Mr. Kaz about that. We'll be there, and we're happy to hear about it. We'll continue to be vigilant, obviously, as this process goes on. There are concerns for sure. And as well, lobby for a seat at the table as these investigations are done and translated into action, hopefully beneficial to both sides. It is clearly a work that is still in progress. But you know, I have to make another observation here tonight. And all of that said, I've noticed a troubling trend since the last time I was here that really has been several years ago on a totally different issue. And it's a lack of civility from some folks in the audience. I don't like it. I've heard the word corruption thrown around very, very frequently in front of this group. And as an investigative news reporter here in Cleveland for more than 40 years, I know a little bit about it. I've uncovered corruption myself. I've investigated corruption allegations. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. But the word is only used when there is absolute proof. Using it, the way I've heard it done here, isn't fair to anybody. and Mr. Ebert, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my experience, it's potentially libelous without firm proof. Some questions that have been asked from the audience, maybe not in the most polite ways, I wouldn't mind hearing the answers to, and that's great. But I certainly, the method that they're being asked, in my view, is all wrong. Look, I've got a lot of people that don't like me from my work all those years, so I'm not looking to create any more people that don't like me. But throwing unproven insults around does nothing and insults you people, and I don't like it. The compromise I've described that we got through talking to you in a civil way got from common interactions with council. It's just a suggestion to anyone here. We're not done with our job just yet, but I suggest to anybody in the audience, it's a good start if you want to accomplish something with council. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come forward? Any topic?
William Zimmerman. So ordinance number 24143, I believe, should be tabled. And that the mayor should not enter into an interim development agreement with the Avon Lake Region Environmental Redevelopment Group. And it shouldn't be called an emergency. I believe that this would give the people, I'd love to have a meeting with the law director, bring my attorneys, I can all hash it out about the language in this letter of intent that is supposedly a non-binding effort. I believe all of this is a charade. It's a facade to just show that there is a way to circumvent the public. So I would love to have an opportunity to have my people meet with you, Gary, so that we can have this taken care of. And I still believe that this should be tabled before the next city council meeting. Furthermore, in regards to Mr. Arlowski's statements, if he looked up the definition of corruption, it's dishonest and illegal acts by those who are in power. Only you are in power. Only you. I can't be corrupt. He can't be corrupt. None of us can be corrupt. Only the people in power can be. Citizens of the city need to know that. It's a very forthcoming definition. Only the people in power. I don't care if he likes my methods or not. He doesn't know you people the way I have for the last few years. When my significant other was raped in the city, and I came to council people to talk to you about it, and you guys did nothing. You didn't care. He went as far to go to the Lorain County Prosecutor's Office to have discussions with the chief of police there. I believe he interfered in the investigation. These people don't know. They don't know my motivation. They don't know the fact that I sat with him for over 2 hours. That's where I have him taped. To no avail. Because nobody did nothing. Nobody cared. Nobody moved forward. That's the motivation I have. Have your significant other be raped by men, and then you're thrown to the side. Shows up at the house. You people have no idea, not even a concept of what that's like until you experience it yourself. You may never experience it, and I hope for God none of you ever do. I have to deal with problems now that I've never thought I'd have in my life. She's having panic attacks on the garage room floor, and I have to sit with her for 45 minutes to coach her out of it. You have no concept. Someday you might, but I don't know. I pray to God someday she's willing to come here and face y'all herself. I don't know if she'll ever have the courage to do that, because then she can tell you what it's really like. He gave me a cross that I gave to her. She still uses it. But it's done nothing to help the healing. guys are worried about crap. That's why I ask you to protect the citizens. Because she is. So tomorrow is voting day. Do not vote for Donna Freeman. Do not vote for Donna Freeman for judge. I'd be glad to give you a long, in-depth dissertation on why that is. But unfortunately, I have 25 seconds left. So I'll go back to my favorite Liz Cheney statement about we need to quit electing idiots. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Anybody else like to come forward and speak on any other topic?
Gerald Phillips, 461 Windward Way. I heard the term hypothetical TIF brought out. I totally don't agree with that concept because it's not hypothetical. We already know what some of the terms are. ALERG wants 30 years and 10 years. So that's not hypothetical as far as terms. Also, we know that it's not hypothetical that the TIF 15 million is going to be part of it to have the city purchase parkland. That's not hypothetical, that's fact. It's in the agreement. Also, it's not hypothetical that $15 million is going to be used for the remodeling. That's in the agreement. It's not hypothetical, it's part of it. They don't get their 30-year TIF and 100%, they're walking away. You don't get your $15 million free purchase and $15 million remodeling, you're going to walk away. So don't say it's hypothetical. You're bound to those terms, even though you may not think you're bound to those terms. And as far as the maximum amount or what the amount is, we all know it's going to be a minimum of 60 million. You know, if it's 60 million, if the school district holds their line, they'll get 25% of the 60 million. So 15 goes to the city, another 15 goes to the city, 15 goes to the school district. $15 million ain't gonna do nothing for the developer to put the infrastructure in. So also, you know, hypothetical, we already have a drafted TIF district by Ted Esborn, who in past has drafted ordinances, encouraged developers and told them how to apply to the city. So it's not hypothetical. We got a TIF district probably drafted by Mr. Esborn in conjunction with the mayor. Also, we have a detailed zoning overlay ordinance, detail to the exact specific provisions, drafted already. Okay, is that tentative? Is that hypothetical? No, we already got one. And that's Ted Esborn again, drafting another document that I don't know why he has the authority to do that. Although I do know, being economic development director, you know, his job's on the line and he's got to promote economic development and he'll do anything he can to do that. Even telling the animal clinic they can get a variance when they shouldn't have. So, you know, also what is quite puzzling and concern, and Ms. Burns brought it up, in fact, she mentioned more lands than I saw. City of Avon Lake has bought, according to her, 25 parcels of land in the Avon Dale, probably to the tune of $1 million. What public purpose does that serve? I'd like to have anybody on city council tell me what public service or what public purpose that serves. To hold land, and that goes back how many years? You buying land? Are you in the land investment business? I mean, that's just shocking. And she mentioned that CEI took that by eminent domain. She raises a very good point. You know, we can go back to the developers interim development agreement, and I'm just gonna, you know, mention one comment. You know, you can read throughout that agreement, and you can find some provisions that give discretion and some don't. But if you read the entirety, you'll see that there's more provisions that binds the city hands. And, you know, it's this statement: the city council, you, legislative body, who does the rezoning, does the TIF, shall not unreasonably delay or condition the consideration of the adoption of the overlay district. So you got an obligation, and if you act unreasonably, you're going to be sued by ALERG. You will. We already know that they came in, the lawyer indicated a willingness. To get to a question that Amy keeps bringing up is, you know, we don't have to buy the land unless it's all remediated. Well, look at the letter of intent, okay, in the purchase agreement, you know, on page D1, it says that after the LOI is signed, you're going to get within 20 days, a copy of a purchase agreement. You're going to get a copy, you're going to sign a purchase agreement with contingencies way before it's remediated. I'll bet you anything. So you're going to be bound to purchase this land with conditions subsequent.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Anybody else wish to speak this evening? Okay. At that point, we are going to go on to miscellaneous business and announcements. Any colleagues to my right? Mr. Cos.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Beginning this Friday, the Toys for Tots campaign will resume. We'll start here for the 2024 Toys for Tots campaign here in the city of Avon Lake. We will have drop boxes here at City Hall, the Avon Lake Fire Department, and the Avon Lake Public Library, as we have had in years past. And a reminder that this is for new, unopened, unwrapped toys to be delivered, dropped off. We're going to start it on this Friday, and the pickup date is supposed to be, I think, December the 6th. So we have about a month to get your toys in. If there are any questions on the Toys for Tots campaign, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Shamir.
We've got 3 announcements. The first is an Environmental Affairs Advisory Board meeting on Wednesday, November 6th at 6 p.m. at the library in the McMahon room downstairs in the lower level. The next is environmentally speaking. The subject will be electrical vehicles. That will be on Tuesday, November 12th at 7 p.m. again at the library. And then we have the Walker Road Ad Hoc Committee meeting, which will be on Thursday, November 14th at 6 p.m. at Bay Village City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gentry.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that there were 2 people who were supposed to be here to speak about NOPEC's opt-in for the gas, and also Deepa, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name yet. She was going to be talking about the power service disruption and programs that NOPEC offers. So that was supposed to be tonight, but we moved them due to the length of these meetings. So that will be held at the Building and Utilities meeting on November 13th at 7 p.m.
Thank you very much.
I got one more,
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Krause.
I can't believe that I almost forgot this. I was actually going to do it next week, but I'm going to do it today. I want to wish my fellow Marines and Navy corpsmen out there a happy 249th birthday this Sunday. The Marine Corps is 249 years old, and for those that have served in the Marine Corps, that our birthday, we tend to celebrate it well, and it's well deserved. And let's not forget that the day after that is Veterans Day, and it's the day that we honor all those that served. So happy birthday, Marines, and happy Veterans Day.
It's November 11th, 10th and 11th. Anybody to my left? Yes, Mr. Smith.
Yes, maybe this is a question for the mayor, I'm not sure. I noticed that the city flags are at half-mast, and I just wondered why they were half-mast. Thank you.
I don't know, Mr. Liskovic, do you have any other? I believe it was one of the former state representatives that passed, but
Davison.
yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Until the,
Davidson, former state rep.
Yes, she was a legend in her own. I do have something. This is actually from the Lorain County Metro Parks. Many of us may have received an email about it, and if anybody's in on the television would like, or in the audience would like to have more information. The Metro Parks organizations for Lorain County, Cuyahoga, Medina Lake, and Geauga collaborate with Northeast Ohio Area Coordinating Agency, which we call NOACA, to develop a trail network that connects people throughout the region to opportunities, resources, jobs, destinations, and each other. And they would like to have you complete a survey. If you could go to Regional Metro Parks with an S trails with an s.com/survey. They'd like to have that completed prior to next Wednesday, November the 13th. Thank you. Anything from the mayor? Law director? Okay, at this time, we have a need for an executive session. Mr. Cos?
Thank you. I move that in compliance with Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22G2, council will adjourn to executive session to discuss the purchase and sale of real property.
Yes, the intent of this is for the purchase of property by Avon Lake Regional Water, and we'd like to have all of our elected officials involved in this meeting. I see Mr. Monroe in the audience here. He will be involved in the meeting. The law director. Ted?
No, Ted doesn't have to be in this.
All right, and that is it. No decisions will be made. We will come back here and we will convene, we have a roll call. So Mrs. Rossmarin, can you give us a roll call to go into the executive session, please?
Mr. Zuber?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Fenderbosh?
Yes.
Mr. Shamir?
Yes.
Ms. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. We're gonna go into executive session. We shall return.